This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon.
All my life I've been drawn to people who've been through things. A lot of people have a story to tell, but few have a testimony. It's probably my roots in the church. While I always did think the non-denominational services ran too long, I was always a good sucker for a testimony. What separates a testimony from a whine or a complaint or even an everyday story is that the testifier has overcome something. Maybe they were struggling at a bad job that was ruining their marriage, but then they persist and they pray. They kept showing up. They kept doing what they needed to do to feed their family. Then next thing you know, God's led them to a better opportunity, more money, better treatment, better for your family. A testimony in a church context is what we might call a hero's journey in the world. The hero starts in one place, faces and overcomes obstacles, and winds up in a better place in the end. In Revelation, in his letters to the 7 churches, Jesus references he who overcomes in every single one of them. Well, testimonies are told by he who overcomes. Throughout the Enjoyer podcast, I've been joined by many of them. Whether it's Ian Murphy of Iron Pig Smokehouse in Gaylord, who risked it for the brisket and incurred the wrath of Queen Gretch in the process. Or Lori Brock in Big Rapids. When she spoke out against the Goshen factory, then she had a horse poisoned to death. Or my friend and mentor, Charlie LaDuff, who found himself tailed and trailed by the law and then separated from his family after being a high-profile critic of Attorney General Dana Nessel. My guest today, former federal prosecutor Rick Convertino, was one of the earliest victims of what we now know as Lawfare. About 20 years before Trump was convicted on trumped-up charges, Convertino led the first post-9/11 conviction from the federal courthouse right there in downtown Detroit. It was pretty much next door to our Federal Reserve offices at the newspaper. I was always at the courthouse, and Convertino used to own that courthouse. He used to do great work there. And then the government he served for 15 years turned on him. They accused him of mishandling the case by not sharing evidence with the defense. They dragged his name through the mud and his career through the ringer. They treated a veteran prosecutor as an enemy of the state. In the end, it didn't work. Rick Convertino is a free man who spent the last decades protecting clients against the very type of lawfare he faced. It's my pleasure to welcome Rick Convertino to the Enjoyer Podcast. Rick, thank you for taking the time.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll start you here, Rick. What do you enjoy about Michigan?
Wow. That's a great question. What I enjoy about Michigan? Well, right now I enjoy the Lions. I certainly am a Lions fan.
Well, you're doing better than Mayor Pete, who didn't even know who they play next week when he was asked. Nice rollout to a governor campaign. You don't even know what the Lions are up to.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, Michigan's full of Michiganians, and Michiganians are great people. They're salt of the earth. When I was coming out here, the first time I came out here was in 1990, I think, 91. I was in the organized crime and racketeering section in Washington, D.C. I was assigned to a couple of strike forces, and one was the Detroit Strike Force. So I traveled out here to take cases with the Detroit Strike Force to help them out and to provide some expertise from the Washington perspective, Main Justice perspective. And so I got to know the people that I worked with, and the people, the defense bar, I thought was one of the best, the federal defense bar in Michigan. But really, the people are what make Michigan, Michigan. And wherever I go, whenever I tell someone I'm from Michigan or Detroit, they always have good things to say. Especially now, Detroit. There's a lot of good sentiment and good feelings about Detroit out there in the United States.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because something like 76% of people who live in Michigan are natives.
Oh,
And I would venture that 90% of that 24% came here because of relationships with those natives. So if you see 4 people sitting at a table for lunch, 3 of them are natives to Michigan.
Mm.
And so what you said I thought was just so right on. Michigan is full of Michiganians. Though I do have to note, Michiganians, are you a Detroit News reader? You
No.
have to be if you're using that word.
No, I'm not a Detroit News reader.
Are you now, or have you ever been, Rick, a Detroit News reader?
Yeah. Yes. I was a faithful reader of the Detroit News at one point. So maybe that's where I got Michiganians from. But I'll tell you an interesting thing. In 1995, as a part of the organized crime and racketeering section in Washington, that was broken into 3 different departments. One was the labor and racketeering section. One was the RICO review section, where they review proposed racketeering, influence, corrupt organization act prosecutions from all over the country, and then they conform them to Department of Justice policy. And then the other is trial attorneys, and I was in the trial attorney section. Trial attorneys were designated to go out in the field when we were requested, or if a particular strike force was lagging, or for whatever reason, Main Justice sought to be involved, or the U.S. Attorney invited Main Justice or the organized crime and racketeering section trial attorneys into a case. So I had cases doing that. I was traveling 2-3 weeks a month, typically, to different strike forces in the United States: Las Vegas, New Orleans, Detroit.
Right.
I had cases in strike forces all over the country. I was in a trial in Detroit in 1995, and I was overcome with exhaustion during the trial. In the trial, and I was rushed to the hospital. And Saul Green, who was the U.S. Attorney at the time, great guy, love Saul Green, have the utmost respect for him. Saul Green reached out to me because I had been coming out there at this point for a significant period of time and working with the strike forces, so I got to know Mr. Green at the time. He said, "Look, you got a family. This traveling is killing you. It's ridiculous." And he offered me a job in the organized crime strike force in Detroit.
Wow.
So, in order for me to stop the traveling, settle down, I had, at the time, I think I had my 3rd daughter was born. So I had 3 kids. I have 5, and so my point is that I could have taken jobs in any of those strike forces, because it was a difficult thing to keep people in the organized crime and racketeering section who were in the trial team, because we'd go out to these different U.S. attorneys' offices. We'd try cases with them. We'd work with them. We'd get to know them. It was almost like an introductory pass, and they would say, "Well, look, why don't you come out here and work instead of..."
It's like a tryout.
It kind of is. And so I could have gotten a job in a number of different places throughout the country. Baltimore, Eastern District of Virginia, New Orleans, Las Vegas, Syracuse, New York. And I chose to be a part of the Michigan community. And a big part of that at the time was the great people that I met, and the defense bar, the criminal defense bar in Michigan, which was superior than any criminal defense bar in any of the other cities that I traveled to frequently. The criminal defense bar in Detroit is relatively small. There are the number of people that are expert in criminal defense, federal criminal defense, compared to other places is relatively small. But the ones that are here, throughout the years that I've been a practicing attorney in Michigan, have been absolutely outstanding. So those are some of the reasons that I chose Michigan when I chose to go to a U.S. Attorney's office and stop traveling from Main Justice.
Now, how is that perceived within the department? I mean, it sounds like your family didn't necessarily have family ties to Michigan, so that's also kind of
Yeah.
unusual. So those two factors, how do you sell your family on a move to an out of the way state that, unlike Pennsylvania, Missouri, you don't drive through Michigan, so you don't have any familiarity. You're essentially taking dad and your husband's word for it. And two, how is that perceived within Maine justice that you're essentially going to one of the outposts as opposed to being in DC?
Well, they don't like it, and
Mm.
but it's done frequently. It is. When I was in the organized crime and racketeering section, when I first got out of law school, I went to the Department of Justice in the fraud section. It's a big section, 140 lawyers, and they were very serious. The Department of Justice at the time, I don't know if they still do, had athletic teams. They competed with other sections in softball, basketball, all sorts of. They would have these
Had a lot of
collegiate.
free time, huh?
Well, it really wasn't a lot of free time, but they took it seriously. And I played on the fraud section's basketball team, and we were playing the organized crime and racketeering section, and we were playing in an outdoor court in Northern Virginia on a Saturday. And I got into it with the guy who was guarding me, who was probably 20 years older than I at the time, and he was a son of a bitch, and we were jawboning, and one thing led to another. Started pushing, and I knocked him on his ass. After the game, he wouldn't shake hands with me. Well, I tell you this because on Monday I went to work, and my boss at the time, who was appointed by the President of the United States, so it was a very senior position, he calls me into his office. Now, there were 100 some lawyers in this section. I went in there, and he said, Paul Coffey? I said, no. He said, well, you got into a tussle with him Saturday. I said, oh, okay, yeah, I know the guy.
That guy, yeah.
That guy, yeah, that asshole. He said, he's the chief of the organized crime and racketeering section.
No.
And he wants to talk to you. So I went over and I had a meeting. He iced me, let me sit there for a while in the waiting room, and then finally calls me in, big palatial office. Had his beautifully tailored shirt on, continental shirt, no pocket, little beautiful tie tack. He was put together, intimidating, and I'm sitting there, and he went on to tell me. He said, you're the kind of guy that that you hate if you're playing against, but you love if they're a teammate of yours. I want you to come over here and work for me. I want you to be a part of the organized crime and racketeering section. I like that attitude. I want you to work for me. So that's how I went to the organized crime and racketeering section. I left the fraud section. I went to work for Paul Coffey. And
he gained respect because of how you competed.
Yeah, he did. He did. Because I went, just like I do everything, unfortunately.
With no fear or favor, it sounds like.
No fear or favor, no backup. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's not so. So I didn't know what he was going to say to me, but that's what he ended up asking me to come work for him, and I absolutely was happy to do that.
Wow.
And one of the things Paul Coffey told me, he said, "Look, I'm going to assign you to various strike forces. We have an issue here." He said, "Probably just like the fraud section, because when I was in the fraud section, I was traveling to Oklahoma, and I had a case. I was in Muskogee, Oklahoma, the Eastern District of Oklahoma, for a year, and that's the ends of the earth." So Coffey told me, "Listen, we just like in the fraud section, when you go out into these different U.S. attorneys' offices, you're going to have the opportunity. Some are going to want you to come there and work full time, and they're going to say, the traveling, come here, and just like you said, it's free tryout,
Mm-hmm.
You know what you're getting." So he said, "So I'm going to assign you to Detroit." And he said, "One of the reasons I'm going to assign you to Detroit is because you'll never, ever leave to go to Detroit."
Who wants to move to Detroit?
And
Who
that's
doesn't
where,
have any family ties there, just
yeah,
moves from D.C. to Detroit.
yeah.
That
And
is
then,
relatively unheard of, I would say.
yeah, we didn't have any family here. We didn't, I had friends, and some of the other options I had were Baltimore and the Eastern District of Virginia, which is Arlington, which is Northern Virginia, Alexandria, Virginia, and those were close to where we lived. Those were equidistant from where we lived,
Right.
and so the transition would not have been so bad. In fact, I wouldn't have had to move if I had taken the Baltimore job. I could have, commuted from where I lived in Maryland. And so that was, those at the time were the choices. And Detroit, it wasn't really a close call, honestly. Detroit was and is a great place. And, and I'm thrilled I made that decision and happy I did.
Now, what made you believe back then? Because this was, this is what, mid 90s, right? So that's just a
95.
few years after Devil's Night came out. And I remember in that book, Zev Shafetz, he talked about how the Free Press reporters used to have a game where, if you go out to grab lunch in a downtown, and you stand on a downtown corner and you look in all four directions and don't see another soul,
Yeah.
you're king of the corner. So you moved to Detroit in the king of the corner era. A decade after you moved, they still had to board up buildings for the Super Bowl to come to town. They had to build a little Potemkin village to give the appearance of stability, not even of progress, but just some stability. And then now you go downtown, it's a laser light show. It's actually gorgeous. It's the nicest I've ever seen it. What made you believe before there was reason to believe?
Well, I can tell you what happened in my first day on the job. First day coming in from at the time I lived in Canton, and I was commuting in, and I'm driving in, and two things happened that were pretty shocking. I'm coming downtown, and I had the radio on. I can't recall which station, and they reported. So it's June 4th. So this would have been the next workday, because whatever June 4th was that year is when the incident occurred. They were talking about four police officers were shot on June 4th, 1995. Four. And I thought, I think it was 95. But I thought, holy shit. I had been in a rough and tumble area, Washington, D.C. At the time was, considered the murder capital of the world. And I had been all over the country. Right. And I had, crime was what I did. And I had never heard of four police officers being shot in one instance. And they said it was in Ypsilanti, Michigan. The other thing that happened on that same drive was, as I came in, I looked up and I was coming in off the lodge. Wasn't exactly sure where I was going, 100%. There was no GPS or
right.
I didn't have a cell phone. And I look up, I see a man on a hill, pulls his pants down and defecates. And those were my two introductions to my first day in Detroit.
Welcome to Detroit.
So I got in the office and I asked one of the guys that I worked with, I said, hey, I just heard 4 cops were shot. Is that possible? And he didn't hear about that. And he said, where? I said, Ips. He said, Ypsilanti? I said, yeah, Ypsilanti. I said, where the hell's Ypsilanti? He said, well, borders where you live in Canton. So you're pretty close to Ypsilanti. I was like, holy shit. So I got together, and one of my first goals, being in the Detroit Strike Force, was to investigate, find out who the hell shot 4 cops in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and prosecute them. And that turned into a task force being formed called GCAT, Gang Crime Attack Team, led by the Michigan Department of State Police, FBI. We had U.S. Marshals, BATF. We even had HUD, special agents with HUD, Ypsilanti Police Department, Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department, and probably a couple more agencies that were involved in it. And we met at the it's closed now, but former Ypsilanti Post, I think it was 26 in Ypsilanti, and we met in the basement. We started a task force and we opened an investigation. I started a grand jury, and it culminated in the indictment of 61 defendants, all of whom were convicted under the RICO statute, which was the first time, I think, in the United States that gang crime was charged under RICO.
Wow.
And we prosecuted all of them, convicted all of them, found out who it was, convicted the shooter of the 4 police. It was really successful.
Wow. What is the Rick Convertino story? Maybe something longer than what I gave, and less long than a Lifetime movie. The Lawfare part of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there was no such thing back then.
Which means that anytime you were prosecuted, it was viewed as that. It wasn't viewed as like some, illegitimate.
It was not. And that was the devastating part. It was so I had nowhere to turn because the allegations were so heinous, even though the underlying charges were absolutely ridiculous. The underlying the gravamen of their issue was that I didn't turn over information that was discovered in Jordan, in the country of Jordan, and I never saw this. Whatever it was, it wasn't material. It was just a joke. But that was not an issue. No prosecutor ever had been prosecuted for any such thing in the history of the United States, nor have they since then. And so when you call it lawfare, it was really warfare. And of course, the defense bar was not somewhere that I could turn. There was no one there. I battled them tooth and nail.
Right.
I gave no quarter nor asked for any. And so, and the claims in the media of a rogue prosecutor, it defiled my reputation, and therefore, what defense attorney is going to represent a rogue prosecutor? The judges were talked to by the FBI, and they my reputation was stellar. The
FBI.
Oh yeah, the FBI. And the reason the FBI was so harsh was because the way this started was I ruffled a lot of feathers in the first prosecution of a terrorism related case in the United States. Maine Justice, where I came from, had a very small section called the Terrorism and Violent Crime section. When terrorism was so inconsequential in the Department of Justice's eyes that they didn't even have their own section. They had terrorism and violent crime.
And violent crimes.
And violent crime. So terrorism was not the paramount concern of the Department of Justice in the late 90s. They had the case in 93, the World Trade Center, but that was thought to have been kind of an attempt by bumbling fools. Although Ramzi Yousef went off when Ramzi Yousef was captured in Pakistan and rendered to the United States, the FBI agent that took him into the lockup for processing initially, they thought they'd be slick, and they took him by the World Trade Center, and they said they parked the car and they looked out and they said, "See that? Still standing." And his response was, "Just wait, just wait."
Oh my God!
So that plan had been hatched for over a decade, and they're resilient and determined Terrorists don't typically back off a goal or objective. And so when I had the first terrorism case, of the agents who were investigating it, they brought it to me in the organized crime strike force. And we didn't have a terrorism section in the U.S. Attorney's Office. 2 months before that, I had proposed to have the organized crime and terrorism section. It was something that I was interested in and have been interested in, Middle East political issues since my undergraduate years.
Okay.
So I had several wiretaps up. I had several investigations that were ongoing at the time before 9/11 regarding terrorism-related activities in the Detroit metropolitan area. Those cases always came to me because I was the one who had the keen interest in them. So at the time 9/11 came, the agents came to me with this fact pattern. And, I stayed in the office all night with the FBI agent. We put together a complaint, made arrests, and started rocking and rolling. There was absolutely no backup in the Department of Justice because they had this feckless section by narrow-shouldered bureaucrats who were running it, who had no ability to take a terrorism case. This was the first one in the United States after 9/11, just a few days after. And so we were kind of on our own. And we just came, and then of course there was the Patriot Act was passed in an emergency situation. Money was thrown all over, and the department then focused on this case, and they wanted the Patriot Act charged. And I was adamantly opposed to charging the Patriot Act because at the time, I thought this was way too important to be a test case. The RICO statute fit absolutely perfectly into terrorism-related cases, just as it did in traditional organized crime cases. You're prosecuting the entity, you're prosecuting the enterprise. And it's critical that to look at it that way. You can charge a RICO conspiracy or a straight up RICO, and the ability to do so was infinitely easier and much, much more effective than this new Patriot Act, which was untested and confusing.
So you had a time-tested tool and kind of a novel theory on the other hand. The terrorism would have been the novel theory at the time.
But see, they needed the terrorism to be charged because if it were charged under the Patriot Act, no, we were charging, the RICO, the indictment that I drafted was absolutely charging and demonstrating and describing the terrorist organization and the terrorist attempts and the terrorists themselves who were involved in the attempt in Detroit.
And RICO was the tool.
And RICO was the tool, and it was the perfect tool. The Patriot Act, I thought, was jamming a square peg in a round hole. And doing that was the purpose was the department wanted to be able to say, we have a Patriot Act case.
Yep.
A Patriot Act, related funds going to that case. And and then but they weren't providing any legal assistance. They were just making these demands on how to charge and what to do. And they were so ridiculous that at one point, I had the guy from the terrorism section sent me a draft indictment, and it was ridiculous. I had this draft indictment, and I then, we had our own indictment. The Assistant Attorney General of the United States, who was a presidential appointee, at the time during a telephone conversation was angry with me because I wasn't playing nice, according to them, with these eggheads from Washington. So he said, send me your indictment. So I faxed him a copy of the proposed indictment that was sent to me from the terrorism and violent crime section. I sent that to the assistant attorney general. They called me back and they told me this is terrible. This is ridiculous. You can't, who wrote this? You're an idiot. On and on and on. I said, oh, which one what's the heading of yours? And he told me. I said, oh, I sent you the wrong one by accident. I'm sorry. I sent you the one from the terror violent crime section. I sent me your superstars. Jeffrey Breinhold was his name. I said I sent you his, and you're right, by the way. So why don't you take a look at the one that's drafted by people who know what we're doing here in Detroit, and because who knows how to prosecute crime in Detroit better than Detroit prosecutors? We know what's on the ground.
Make news local again. Make prosecutions local again. The idea of eggheads on the East Coast.
Exactly.
Sitting there in their infinite wisdom deciding exactly how a case should be prosecuted. It just,
exactly.
When you say it out loud, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. It never made sense. And that was one thing that I learned abundantly clear when I was traveling to different U.S. attorney's office when I was in Maine Justice. I would say, listen, you're the experts here. I'm just here to help. If that includes me carrying your trial bags into court, I'm fine with that. If that includes me drafting memos for you to, review, or motions or whatever you need, I'm from Washington and I'm here to help. So
those dreaded words.
Right. But I meant it. And but what you have now, and what causes these chaotic, moments, heaving and turning in the departments, all the departments in Washington, is you have political appointees who are infused, who are, set into positions that they have no reason, no basis, no experience, none at all. They're political favors. They're a high-level position. They're in their mid-level positions as well. They're political appointees that are brought in there, and in my case, they were called the Miami Mafia, the mid-tier Department of Justice. So many of them came from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami, and that was after the Gore Bush case. And so these were people who were people from Miami and Florida in general were being rewarded, and they were given positions in the department.
Okay.
And I butted heads with two of them. And if you'd like, I can tell you about that. Two of the biggest jagoffs that you'll ever hear. One was James Comey. The second one was Christopher Wray. Yeah. And the reason that we had the issues with both of those was because after we prosecuted the case, convicted the terrorists in Detroit, was a resounding success. But the people from D.C., had a bad case of butt hurt, and that included, all of it. It included the deputy attorney general, the assistant attorney general, for the criminal division, and all the subordinates that were the political appointees, because they thought, well, this guy, I was in a position at the time where they couldn't take me off the case. I had, intimate knowledge of the case in every single instance. And I put it together with grit and work and sweat and blood and man hours, 20-hour a day work days. And we were successful. Me and two FBI agents, and we were successful. We held that whole case together with paper clips and, spitballs, and it worked. After the case, the Department of Justice was very, very angry with me in particular. And so I didn't care.
Had you prosecuted it under your theory and rather than the Patriot Act? Was that the heart of the problem?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And they couldn't they really had no choice, because once we were Powerball, and by the time they kept complaining, when then the one time the Deputy Attorney General of the United States was on a call with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the U.S. Attorney, who was a guy named Collins at the time, and me, And the deputy attorney general said, now he's the number 2 guy in the Department of Justice, appointed by the President of the United States, confirmed by the United States Senate, the oldest deliberative body in the history of the world. He's on the phone with me and he says to me, hey, I'll take your ass off the case. I'll just take your ass off it. I said, go ahead, take me off it. Because I knew he couldn't. Because we were too far along. And I was the only person who could take that thing to fruition. And so they hoped I lost that case. That's yeah. They were trying to sabotage that case. So after we won the case, and I moved on to another case, which was the Chris Webber indictment in the Eddie, Georgia. You remember Chris Webber, when the basketball player, one of the Fab Five, Michigan? I had that investigation. Yeah. And so I moved on to that. The next day I was working on that case, and I got a call about a week later from a staffer from Senator Grassley's office. Now, I didn't know Senator Grassley. I'm not from Iowa. I'm from New York. And here I am transplanted in Michigan. I couldn't care less at the time about politics.
Right.
I had no ongoing interest, nor did I have any information. So he calls me and he says, hey, we're doing a hearing from the Grassley and the Finance Committee, doing a hearing on how terrorists use false identification and their, money laundering, and you had all those things in your case. We're interested in reviewing your case. Can we come out there and look at the information? And I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, but you need to talk to someone way above my pay grade. They talked to my superior, and they came out. They looked at the information. And then the guy says to me, the staffer from Senator Grassley, hey, you'd be a great witness in front of the Finance Committee. Would you testify about your case? I said, I'd love to, but, that's above my pay grade. So a couple of days later, I got a call from someone from D.C. in the Assistant Attorney General's office. He was previously from Savannah. Now, these are people that had never had, they didn't have any prosecutorial experience or governmental experience. And he calls me and he says, I hear Grassley's people called you. I said, yeah. He said, you shouldn't be talking to them. You should be, somebody else should be handling that. I said, okay, well, now you are, right? So he said, yeah, do you owe them a phone call? I said, yeah, they asked me to call them back when I, found out about who to contact and who to talk to. He said, well, don't call them back. I'll contact them and you're out of it. Don't talk to these people anymore. They're no friend of ours, he said. They're no Grassley's friend of ours.
Right.
So, of course, they contacted me again, and I told John, I said, John, I'm told you're not to contact me. I'm not to talk to you. They said, we're I work for United States Senator. I'll call whoever the hell I want. I'm not I don't have to go through the legal affairs, legislative affairs branch. If I want to call somebody, I'm going to call them. So I'm calling you. We want you to testify. And if you don't testify, if you can't testify, we're going to subpoena you to testify. And they subpoenaed me to testify.
Which keeps you clear because now I'm forced to do it, right? It's not, I'm not just acting on initiative. I'm not just being helpful.
And remember that the whole purpose of what they wanted me to tell them how successful this prosecution, this RICO prosecution of the first terrorism case that came after 9/11 was. It was they were telling me that it was historic. It was something that's going to be a playbook that they wanted to promote. They wanted to get this out there, that what a great job Detroit did and the FBI in Detroit did.
Wow.
So the Department of Justice, that's when my boss came to me and said, are you a whistleblower? I'm like, what? What the hell are you talking about? See, I love the Department of Justice. I still love the Department of Justice.
Do you?
I do. It was just hijacked temporarily. But of course I'm not a whistleblower. And they were concerned about all the information and all of the problems that were caused during the course of this prosecution and all of the dirty deeds that were done by Main Justice and other people in my office to try and sabotage this prosecution. So they got in their heads that I was communicating with Grassley, and I later found out that Senator Grassley was very critical of the FBI in particular. And he had a history of being critical of the FBI. And I incidentally saw it that yesterday, Senator Grassley said that he wants Christopher Wray out. He wants him to resign. He said he had over a decade of issues with the FBI and Christopher Wray in particular.
Right.
And if you look, you'll see that part of that was because of me. So they didn't want me to, the Department of Justice did not want me to testify. By that time, I was ostracized. They thought I was giving information to the senator from Iowa, which I wasn't. They thought I was, being critical of the department outside of the department, which I absolutely wasn't, nor would I have ever done. And they were convinced that I was a threat. And so being a threat within the department, there was also an FBI agent at the time, I forget her name, who was a whistleblower. And Senator Grassley had given her protection. And so he was aware that there were people who were unhappy, internally unhappy in the FBI with the way the Main Justice was prosecuting these terrorism cases and investigating terrorism cases. So that all was going on at the time. And, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the department did not want me to testify. And again, my testimony would have been nothing but praise for the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the successful prosecution of 5 terrorists in Detroit, Michigan. And so that was that's when the lawfare aspect began. So I became the subject of several internal investigations.
Several.
They brought it. Let's see. There was Office of Professional Responsibility, my office. There was a special counsel that was brought in from Buffalo, New York to investigate me.
God.
There was the FBI had an investigation. I can't recall it. Maybe I think there were 5 ongoing investigations where they took every single case that I had ever done since 1990 in the Department of Justice and scoured it and scoured every single case that I had done. And now, if you look at anybody's work in any particular profession and you go back a decade and scour it for whatever you're looking for, you're going to find something. And so
you go look back at my byline since 2014, you're going to find some stinkers in there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not many. I invite anyone to do this. You won't find many, but you'll find a non-zero amount, let's say.
Well, that's exactly how I felt, have at it.
Right.
I certainly did nothing knowingly or intentionally that was any diversion from Department of Justice policies or procedures or ethical and morally. My integrity was intact from day one when I was sworn in to become an attorney. So I did welcome it, but Collins, the U.S. attorney at the time, and his minions called me into the U.S. attorney's office, and they had relegated me to be the duty AUSA, which is a position that's held by new attorneys, but I was the full-time duty AUSA. So I was in the duty court in front of a magistrate doing arraignments full-time. So I went from being the top dog to what they thought was a humiliating and embarrassing position while they conducted these bullshit investigations. So they called me into the office, Collins, and he threw down a manila envelope, and I opened it up, and it had these allegations that were the culmination of all these investigations. And my heart, was pounding, and I started flipping through this, and I thought, are you shitting me? I said, is this all you guys could come up with?
Right.
With spending hundreds of thousands of dollars investigating one guy this is it. I said, bring it on. And it was that document that then was leaked through someone in that office to a guy named Ashenfelter, a reporter with the Detroit Free Press.
Yeah, David Ashenfelter, Free Press, Pulitzer-winning reporter over there, formerly.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. So what Ashenfelter did was he saw fit to put that in the front page of the Detroit Free Press. So these were allegations that were easily refuted. There was nothing at all that was worrisome to me. There's nothing unethical or untoward. They were all subsequently declined and found to be meritless, but that wasn't reported. And so that was in the front page of the Free Press. And that's the time when Senator Grassley said, look, you need some help. This is out of hand, and we got you into this, and I'm going to help you out. So he offered me a position. He said, look, come up here for 6 months, work for the finance committee as a special counsel, and then this will blow over. These people will, they'll calm down, and you go back to Detroit and continue on with whatever you want to do, if that's what you want to do. So I had accepted this detail position with the finance committee, and then the department said, no, he can't. He's not going anywhere, and we're not paying his salary. He's not going.
Oh,
so Senator Grassley then, as a result of that, said, yeah, we want him up here. And there was a Mexican standoff, and Senator Grassley said, okay, well, you got this guy now who's the nominee for Deputy Attorney General. His name is James Comey, and we're going to keep him right in the committee. He's not going out for a vote. We're not going to have him. We're going to freeze his nomination. So Comey's nomination was frozen, and a staffer from Grassley's office, the one that I had been in contact with, he told me that Vice President Cheney called Senator Grassley and was furious with him about Grassley withholding the nomination, and so that they went back and forth, and the department relinquished, and they said, okay, we'll release him for a detail position for 6 months. And they did. And then Comey was then released, and he was voted, the Senate confirmed him. And then the next issue was, well, okay, when people are detailed, it's not an uncommon thing to detail an attorney or a position from any of the departments to another department to gain experience, and it often benefits both departments. So it's not uncommon. What they do is they'll send somebody from Minnesota to work we had somebody from New Mexico when I was in the organized crime and racketeering section. He was detailed in from New Mexico U.S. Attorney's Office. He worked there. His pay was from the New Mexico U.S. Attorney's Office, and his room and board was paid by the department for a year. The department says we're not paying his room and board. Well, I couldn't afford to live in two places, two expensive cities at the same time. And so that Grassley said, no, we're not asking for anything special. We want you to do the same thing you do for every other detail position. They said no. So that's when Senator Grassley withheld the nomination of Christopher Wray as the assistant attorney general. So these people went berserk, and they focused even harder on me. So Wray and Comey now knew that their positions both were qualified as a result of this, troublemaker from Detroit who was in now with Senator Grassley, causing all these issues. So they paid for my room and board for 6 months. I went out to work for Senator Grassley, and that's when the real shitstorm started. And they sealed my office in Detroit. They searched my computer, my whatever they could find, and they came up with this fakakta piece of evidence that I had never seen, that was inconsequential, immaterial. It was about it was a photograph that we had of trees that were important because they were written in the sketch pad for identification, geographical identification of the terrorists that we indicted in Detroit, and the trees were not there at a later date. They were cut down, and so the theory was that I had been aware that the trees were not there, were cut down, and therefore the sketch pad didn't make sense, even though the trees were cut down after the sketch was made, and that I didn't turn this over to the defendants in the case. It was total bullshit. But they proceeded.
How would that have helped anything?
Well, because the department said, and the defense attorney said, well, had we had the information that there were no trees, it wouldn't have matched up with the trees that were in the sketch that was recovered of the defendants in the terrorism case. There were sketches in the terrorism case of a number of things that were hand-drawn, that were taken out of the Detroit apartment of Nabil al-Marab, who was one of the main defendants at the time, targets. It was a little notepad, and a day planner, and it had a sketch of the Queen Alil Hospital in Amman, Jordan, the sketch of it, including trees that were directly outside the hospital. As soon as we showed this sketch to our counterpoint in Amman, Jordan, they said, yeah, this is the Queen Alil Hospital. And then I went to Jordan and I looked at the Queen Alil Hospital, and I had the sketch in my hand, and I looked at the hospital. I said, well, shit, that's damn right, that's a sketch. Also in Turkey, the sketch had the airport, the U.S. base in Turkey, and it had the flight pattern in detail listed out in this sketch of U.S. forces and Allied forces, and how the planes took off from the airbase in Turkey, and the particular planes that were in Turkey, in this day planner that was found in Detroit, Michigan. And so the theory was, at a later time, after they began investigating me, the FBI agent who was investigating me had someone in Amman take pictures of the area, and there were no trees there, even though Google Earth showed that there were trees there at the time. But this was the basis for what became the Lawfare indictment of me.
What?
Yeah. And so they came to me, as the case got closer. I mean, if you can imagine, so, here I was devoted my whole adult life,
right,
to qui pro domina justitia sequitur, he who prosecutes in the name of Dame Justice. It's on that seal. So I got it right here in my office. It's what I absolutely lived for. I mean, I was the top dog. I had no thought or plan of leaving the Department of Justice until I retired. That was my life dream, to prosecute cases. When I opened up a case, did my opening statement, I'd get up there and I'd say, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rick Convertino, and I represent the United States of America. The United States of America. mean, my parents were born in Italy. And to be able to say that just filled me up every time I did it. And that was my identity. And then to have it ripped out by some fat asses who could neither try a case nor had the gumption to prosecute a case, just was it. I just couldn't believe that it was happening, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And we went to trial, and thank God that juries are the great levelers in this country. Took them about minutes,
45 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. But I'll tell you, the department came to me several times. I had a friend who was an assistant U.S. attorney with me in Washington, D.C., Bill Sullivan, and he was a great guy. I love him. He went on to work at a big law firm. So Bill calls me. He says, "Hey, I'm reading about you in the paper. Do you need help?" I'm like, "No, I don't need help with these, these limp dicks. I mean, no." "Well, you sure you don't? If you do, let me know." So there came a point in time where I thought, yeah, I better get an attorney. I better get somebody. So I had my friend Bill from this big law firm, Winston and Strawn. He agreed to help me, and he came out and met with these guys, and he said, these guys are crazy. They're maniacal, and they're getting their charging orders from Comey and that level to take you out. They want you prosecuted because they think you're giving information to Grassley about the Department of Justice and how effed up it was, which I ultimately did. I did tell Senator Grassley at some point, when I was working for him. I said, let me tell you what really is happening here. And he was astounded. He couldn't believe it. So as the trial got closer, I was now a defense attorney, and they had me. The department made me tell each incoming client that I was the target of a Department of Justice prosecution and that I was going to be prosecuted. So I would have people come in who wanted me to represent them, and I'd have to tell them this, and I'd have to have them, sign this form. And I had a guy in Flint. I represented this guy in Flint in federal court, and the judge said to this defendant, said, "I want you to know, do you know that Mr. Convertino is being charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office? And I'm telling you that because he may curry favor with the U.S. Attorney's Office. In your case, may suffer because
what?
Judge told it." And this guy says to the judge, "The only reason I want him is because I know how much he hates the Department of Justice. And
yes.
He's going to do whatever he can." And I'll tell you what, I did. I didn't work 20 hours. I worked 24 hours a day if I had a case in front of the U.S. Attorney's Office to make sure that I kicked the shit out of him, which I did a number of times. So as I got closer to my case, the Justice Department, knowing that it was, a shitstorm was coming for them, they offered me plea offers.
Mm-hmm.
And first was, one felony. I'm like, I told Bill, get that out of here. Then it got, they got more favorable. So then it was a misdemeanor at one point. So I was telling Bill, my attorney and good friend, we were out to dinner, and I told him, I was a member of the Ohio bar and the Michigan bar. When I went to law school in Ohio, and so I took the bar in Ohio as soon as I graduated. I graduated in 2 years from law school instead of 3.
Wow!
So I took the law exam in Ohio, and so the Ohio bar had written me telling me that my dues were passed and that if I didn't pay by X date, that I would be suspended for, non-payment. So I told Bill, I said, yeah, I think, at the time, I mean, here I am I was really struggling. And I told him, I said, I'm just going to let my Ohio bar lapse. I don't really need it. And I can't afford, $255 right now. So we had a conversation about that just in passing. So the next day or so, the department comes back and they say, we'll dismiss the case if he gives up his Michigan bar license. And so Bill says, hey, good news, you give up your Michigan bar license, they'll dismiss the case. I said, good news. I said, F that.
Right.
So he said, are you sure, bud? You never know what's going to happen in trial. I said, no, I don't care. If somehow I get convicted, I'll go to prison with my head up. I'm not pleading guilty or acknowledging I did anything wrong, because I didn't. So I tell Bill that. A couple of days later, he comes back and he says, hey, you remember how you told me your Ohio bar license is lapsing, that you didn't want to,
offer them the Ohio that you're going to let lapse anyway.
He told them that. He told them that. They said yes. Offer them so to dismiss the case, they said, we'll dismiss the case if he lets that Ohio bar lapse that he was going to do anyway, right? So I looked at Bill and I said, well, tell him this. He said, what should I tell him? I said, tell him that. So he did. And I borrowed the money from my brother, and I paid for my Ohio bar, and we went to trial, and they were, embarrassed and humiliated at trial. But when I came out of that courtroom after the jury came back with the acquittal, Quinn Kleinfelter, who was a reporter at the time, I don't know what happened to him, but he was a good guy. He was with PBS. He had a microphone. He says, victory, you won. And I'm like, I didn't win anything. I lost. I mean, this when the government uses its resources and wrongfully targets somebody, I mean, it is devastating. So the use of what we're now calling lawfare, at the time, there was no such thing. I was on my own. So even though I was acquitted, I still, the department filed grievances against me with the Michigan and the Ohio bar. I had to deal, all of that was non-meritorious. There was no issues with, across the board. It was a resounding defeat for these assholes who put and spent government money, taxpayer money, to investigate a non-investigatable offense. And at the end of the day, I resigned from the Department of Justice and committed the rest of my career to fighting, this injustice that's happening and happens, has happened frequently since that time.
Yeah.
Judges get polluted. The judge in my case was very anti me. I didn't win any motion. He was caustic. He was rude. He believed that I was, what the department said, a rogue attorney. We filed vindictive prosecution, selective prosecution motions where we showed that in the history of the United States, charges like this have never been filed. And real cases where they were egregious, where people were convicted wrongfully,
right, they
were never filed. And the judge said, his answer was, well, maybe they're starting today. So denied. So it was a real struggle for years. I go into court as the guy who, not somebody who was the victim of lawfare, but who's someone who whose reputation was tainted for sure.
Rick, how do we distinguish between lawfare and a legitimate prosecution?
Uh, well, that's an excellent question, and the most obvious way is to look and see whether or not this is a prosecution that would be independently brought were it not for the individual who is on the end of it.
Mm.
In other words, you put instead of pick someone, Joe Bag of Donuts. Would Joe Bag of Donuts have been prosecuted for this same violation in the same manner and means that this defendant is? And that's usually, an acid test. You'll be able to determine pretty much right away, just through common sense, whether or not this
Right.
is that's wrongfully brought.
Right.
And let's talk about the obvious one. Let's talk about Trump's conviction in New York City. There has never been a prosecution that was brought before a jury and a conviction gained in this with the same amount of money and the same nucleus of operative facts. And so if you were to take someone else and you were to insert him in that same set of facts, would that person have even drawn the attention of the New York District Attorney's Office? And the answer would have
Right.
no. You look at the same with the Attorney General of the state of New York. Would someone in the same set of nucleus of operative facts have drawn the attention of the Attorney General and someone in that same scenario? Would the fine have been as high? Would the ramifications been on par or parity with the one in this instant case? And the answer
So
is resounding
it
no.
sounds like the distinction is, with lawfare, justice is not blind. Justice has red eyes, and it's targeting you, and it's chasing you. It's going after specific people, not just crime as it's done, and we know about it.
Yeah, you can make a good dog bad. If
Right.
they're hungry
Right.
enough, you make them mean, and they'll go after anyone they're pointed to. And that's what happens. That the department again, I mentioned earlier, it's one of the most storied and conceptually beautiful organizations in the history of the world. The United States Department of Justice. I mean, everything it stands for is perfect. It's the hijacking of the department by political appointees who have no business being in the Department of Justice or, the waste management department in your local city or town. These are people who are, who are motivated to gain favor with the people in the next step above them.
Right.
And so the way to attack it is you can't say the Department of Justice is corrupt, because it's not corrupt. And people get tuned out to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh yeah, bullshit. Well, I used to watch TV and I'd hear something on the news, or so-and-so is saying there's a conspiracy against him, or the government is turned on him. And I would look at it and say, what bullshit. But now I don't, that it happened to me.
Right.
I look and I think seriously, hey, is this something that's possible? And I've seen it with clients that come in and they they'll tell me a story and I'm like, it's incredible. And I wouldn't have believed it had I not had this, horrific experience myself. So it happens, and it happens all the time, and it's powerful, and it's devastating, and it's ruinous, and there's almost no way to come back from it. And so what I found the most effective way to target it is, you can't target the entity or the institution itself. You target these snails, these vipers, individually. And once you go after, this guy over here, and you focus on him, and then that guy over there, they start, doing this. They're pointing at each other, and they're thinking, well, okay, well, I didn't want to get involved, but, and that's how the whole thing, implodes. But that takes time and resources and determination and dedication and hard work. But here's how they prevent it. Here's the defense. The defense is they have to circle the wagons. They have to do that quickly because any one part of the defense of the wagon means the wagon is at stake.
Right.
So they promote, they give awards, they placate, they make sure that the people who are involved in this nefarious, lawfare activity are rewarded for it. So you see, in my case, one became a federal judge. One is a judge here in Michigan. One got a promotion to become head of a section, and one became a U.S. attorney. So when there's a vested interest then, and then you have, you can't say a judge, you can't impute the integrity of a judge, and so once they're given these positions, it becomes more concretized and more difficult to defend or attack if you're on the wrong end of it. And so that's what they do almost immediately is prepare and promote and give people the ability to have an insulated position.
This experience, both as a defendant and then as a criminal defense attorney, has this changed your view of your time when you were a prosecutor? Like, when you look back at it now, were you a force for good as a prosecutor? Can you be? Is that even a possibility as a federal prosecutor?
Oh, absolutely. I believe that I did enormous good for my community and the people of the state of Michigan, in particular, when I was here. The gang case in Ypsilanti freed up several neighborhoods that were absolutely oppressed by these gang members. The prices of housing went from mid 30s or 40s to over $100,000 a year after the indictment. The communities were transformed. I received a wonderful note, handwritten note from then Attorney General Janet Reno at the time, who was said she was very grateful for my work and efforts. I'll tell you, you got time for an interesting side story about the Ypsilanti case? We indicted the Crips and Folks and the Bloods, and so we had two separate indictments, and all the indictments amounted to over 60 individuals and convictions. But there was one fella, he was a Crip, and every one of these gang members told on every other one of the gang members. They once they were charged and indicted, it was a new ball game. Instead of getting arrested for 5 grams of cocaine taken to Washtenaw County and you're back on the street again, they were getting arrested, had 5 grams of cocaine, and they're going into the federal lockup with minimum mandatory 5 years. So it was a new ball game.
Oh, it's federal day.
Federal day. And they couldn't, they could not stop giving information against each other. They were squealing like rats. But there was one who refused to do it, and his name was I don't know if I should say it, Los, they called him. He was a bad dude, and his position was, I don't care if it'll benefit me or not. I'm responsible. He pled guilty. He said, I'm responsible for what I did. And I did what I did, and I'll take my consequences, but I'm not having a part of turning on anyone else or doing harm to anyone else. And I respected that. So when he was sentenced, I told him, I said, look, when you get out, if you want to turn your life around, get in contact with me, and I'm happy to help you. And I did that with a number of people over the years. So I now went into private practice. He was convicted. I think he was sentenced to Jackson and also Leavenworth. And when he got out, he contacted me. I had just opened up my office in downtown Plymouth, Michigan, set my phones up I was in the office alone. Phone rings. Hello, law office. Says he called me. The gang members called me Cappuccino for some reason. He says, "Yeah, Cappuccino." I said, "Oh, yeah, great." He said, "This is Los." Yeah. He said, "I want to see if you're a man of your word. I'm out, and I want to come meet." So I didn't know if he's going to shoot me or what he was. Right. So I said, "Well, here's my." He says, "I know where your office is," and he came down and we had a talk, and I was convinced that he was going to do the right thing and wanted to. One thing led to another. I got him a job. I gave him a car. Gave him one of our cars that we were going to sell. I gave it to Los, so he could get to and from work. And one day we were having lunch, and I said, "Hey, I gotta go. I'm going to talk to some kids at Plymouth Canton High School, Plymouth Canton, on Ann Arbor Road." So he says, "Okay." He says, "You mind if I tag along?" I said, "No, happy to have you." So he came, and I was telling they were at risk. They were deemed at risk kids by the school.
Oh, he's perfect
board.
for them.
Well, he wasn't going to talk. I didn't know what, I didn't want to let him go. I didn't know what he'd do.
Right.
So I gave my spiel about, don't be a numbnuts and do the right thing. And if you need help, it's out there and and I said, and, you can wind up in a position, fortuitously or not, that you get with the wrong crowd. My mom used to say, be an engine, not a caboose. I mean, you can wind up with the wrong people and get yourself in a lot of trouble. And like Los here, I convicted him and he went to prison, and, he can tell you how hard that road was. And so stay out of that path. Okay. So I get done with my talk and I'm standing there and I say, "Any questions?" I see a few hands. Yeah. I said, "Yep, sir. Yeah, I have a question for Los."
Mm-hmm.
Shit. I said, "Yeah, you okay answering a question?" He says, "Yeah." So they asked him a question. He answered it. He was magnificent. He was incredible. He was profound.
Mm-hmm.
And another question. "Yeah, you. I have a question for Los." So all the questions were for Carlos, not for me. We get done with the talk. People are coming up, shaking his hand after, So I get a call from one of the assistant superintendents or somebody who was in the back of the room, and they said, "Hey, we're calling you." I went back to my office. They called me. They said, we'd like you to, I want you to know how much we appreciate you coming out and doing that for us. And it's always, beneficial to the kids, et cetera. We'd like you to do it again would you speak to a more broader range of students and more, do it to different schools? I said, "Sure, I'd love to." They said, "Oh, and can you bring Los?"
Los is your meal ticket now.
So we were a tag team. And they loved him. And he really is a profound guy. And he was working two jobs. One was night shift at a gas station, and he would be reading books, and said somebody came in and asked him what he was reading. He told him. The guy said, "Can I borrow it?" He let him borrow it, brought it back. This went on, with different people. And so he asked the owner of the gas station, he said, "Hey, you mind if I put a little shelf up selling books?" Guy said, "No, go ahead." So he started selling books while he was working in this gas station.
So creative.
Now he owns his own bookstore in Ypsilanti, Michigan. He'd be a great person for you to interview.
That's incredible. What's the bookstore?
Cultural Center. I'm kind of embarrassed. I don't know the whole.
Well, we'll have to check that out. That's fascinating.
And
wow.
He was visited by Kamala Harris during the election, and Governor Whitmer went out to see him at the bookstore.
Wow.
So he's a force out there. He's doing fantastic. I'm proud of him. He's a good friend of mine now, and he's doing wonderful things. So there is the ability as a prosecutor to do things that absolutely change the impact and force of people's lives.
Absolutely.
That's one example.
We'd love to meet Los and learn more about Los. That's such a great story. Rick, I'll get you out of here on this one. You've been so generous with your time today. A would-be client, say they're listening to this. They're arrested by the FBI. They're accused of horrible things. What should their next move be?
Keep your mouth shut. That's your next move. That's easier said than done.
Now, don't you want to be helpful to law enforcement? I'm sure we have a lot of helpful people. Why shouldn't people look to be helpful in that case?
Because you're never helpful to law enforcement. You're giving them the ability to twist and turn and manipulate, and they're interviewing you for a purpose. I mean, is the purpose of their interview to help you? Is the purpose of their interview to make your stay in the incarcerated position you're in a little benefit, a little easier, or is the purpose to promote and move their case and make their case? And that's clearly the interest. It's not your interest to assist any prosecution or any investigation unless it's a concerted effort and decision made between you and your attorney. There are times when it is propitious to assist. There's clearly no doubt about that. But that's a decision that needs to be made with the help of a competent defense attorney.
Not there are someone just speaking off the top of their head because they've gotten a knock on the door.
You know who's the worst at it? Giving information that cops.
Really?
Yeah. I've represented a lot of cops. That's almost exclusively what I did for a long cops, federal agents, mostly Michigan Department of State Police, which is one of the finest police departments in the United States, if not the best. Love the Michigan Department of State Police, in general. But a cop will get interviewed, and they think, they're going to think I have something to hide, and they make the worst decisions when they're approached, and it almost always comes back to bite them hard. So yeah, cops are the worst because they know what they can do too. They know the effects of an intimidating interview and what type of information they can get out of someone. So, but yeah, they're the worst when they're approached.
Absolutely. Rick, where can people learn more?
But if you're ever approached, I want you to do one thing. Give me a call.
Absolutely. Where can people learn more about yourself, your law firm, and your story? I mean, we just got a little bit into it. We'll definitely have you back. Where can people learn more, Rick?
Well, there's a I don't know what it's called, not a podcast, but was a
kind of a podcast. This American Life, right?
This
the
American
prosecutor.
Life. Yeah,
right.
It's probably the best way to get kind of a picture of the story of what happened. But I'm available to love to talk about it and tell people about what can happen and how dangerous the government can be. Government's not there to help. Theoretically, it is, and it should be, but like I said, it gets hijacked by ambitious people whose goal is to promote themselves, and you get results that are catastrophic. So beware.
Absolutely. Rick, thank you so much for your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate you very much.